Welcome to meeting number 3 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Pursuant to the motion of the House of June 18, 2025, the committee is meeting to study the impact of the criteria for awarding federal funding on research excellence in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. If I can ask everyone to be quiet, please. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I would ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I would like to make few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and as well as the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I would like now to welcome our witnesses for the first panel. We are joined by David Freeman, Associate Professor from Simon Fraser University, and he is joining through video conference. We are also joined by Dr. Yuan Yi Yu, Assistant Professor of International Relations and International Law, Leiden University. Thank you to both of you for appearing before the committee. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for the opening remarks, and then we will proceed to the round of questioning. Mr. Freeman, we will start with you. So you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for inviting me. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm a professor of economics at Simon Fraser University, and I research behavioral and experimental economics. I'm personally grateful to SSHRC for support for my own work as an MA and PhD student at UBC and now as a faculty member at SFU. As background, I served on 4 SSHRC Insight Development Grant Adjudication Committees for Economics from 2020 to 2023. Let me start with my experience there. My experience was quite positive. Members were well qualified. They took the task seriously. They were committed to funding the best proposals according to the standards of economics. Criteria were reasonably well specified to enable the committee to do that. I actually liked working with criteria better than, say, the NSF criteria. The SSHRC criteria are just easier to interpret. Disciplinary evaluation does what it is intended to do. It picks the best proposals according to the standards of each discipline. Academia is organized by discipline, so this is a sensible way of adjudicating proposals. However, SSHRC lacks good criteria for allocating money across disciplines and programs. I don't have a perfect solution, but I want to point to 3 issues and offer some incremental suggestions that might better align SSHRC funding with priorities of Canadians. Number 1, let's talk about the SSHRC Talent Program, which funds fellowships and scholarships for grad students and postdocs. I think the distribution of that is out of line. Let's just pick on a little example here. In 2024, the talent program funded 140 scholarships and fellowships in sociology, 155 in history, only 52 in business, and 40 in economics. Now, at a typical university, both business and economics are just much larger departments than history and sociology. It almost goes without saying, there's much more demand for business and economics PhDs as well. So I think this allocation of funding is perverse, and I don't mean to pick on these disciplines in particular. It's to generate a more general problem. So I recommend that the SRSR rethink how it allocates talent program funding across disciplines. Consider a metric like the number of students graduating a year for allocating it across disciplines. Maybe make an adjustment for the market demand for graduates. Second point, Canada is way behind other jurisdictions in providing high quality data to social science researchers. SRSR should have funding to address this. There's just way more influential work in economics using Swedish and American data sets than using Canadian data sets, even if you adjust for Canada being a smaller country than America. The research that we do have from Canada has generated important insights into unique Canadian policies and institutions. But when we don't have the data to do that research, well, we have to rely on imperfect lessons from elsewhere. So I recommend that SRSR set aside funds for research that uses Canadian data and that creates new Canadian data sets. Third point, a tricky one. I want to discuss activist research in SRSR disciplines. Some approaches to scholarship focus on normative as opposed to positive questions. Some even reject the distinction between pursuit of truth and pursuit of activism. This is highly discipline dependent, and it exists on a continuum in the disciplines where there are some of these approaches. Here's the problem. Activist faculty are almost universally left to far left in their politics, and advocacy-oriented scholarship methods are prone to the influence of researcher biases, views, and morals. In my opinion, the lack of political balance among advocacy-oriented researchers risks social buy-in for universities as institutions. Is it legitimate for a broad spectrum of Canadian taxpayers to fund left and far left advocacy under the guise of research funding? I think the answer is no, but this is an exceptionally tricky problem to address in a principled way. I don't have a perfect solution, but let me offer some ideas. First, I suggest that funding envelopes prioritize core research through the Insight program. Second, Insight program criteria should not value normative and activist research, nor should they value non-academic outputs as knowledge mobilization. Third, I suggest that SRSR revamp any EDI policies to make viewpoint diversity, and especially political viewpoint diversity, the primary priority. And finally, I suggest that the government get a politically balanced and representative governing council for each of the tri-councils. Researchers can seek connections and partnerships on their own. They can engage in political activism on their own dime and on their own time. To summarize, I recommend that SRSR distribute graduate scholarships by student numbers, fund Canadian data, and rethink funding for activist research. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks a lot. We will now proceed to our second witness for this panel, Dr. Yi Zhu. Sorry for that. Please, floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee, for being here. It's a pleasure to be back in Ottawa to testify in front of you today. Every year, the federal government of Canada spends billions of dollars on research funding. Canadians rightly expect that this money will be used and allocated to the most deserving researchers based on excellence and excellence alone, in order for them to pursue high-quality research that will benefit Canadians and humanity in general. Sadly, this is no longer the case. Today, federal research funding is often allocated on the basis of race, sex, gender identity, ideological conformity, and other criteria which have nothing to do with the pursuit of truth and excellence. And thus, we have today federally funded Canada research chairs, which are only available to people of a certain race or of a certain sex, or a combination of both, even though none of these characteristics have anything to do with the quality of somebody's research. Indeed, universities may lose their funding under the program of Canada research chairs unless they meet diversity quotas in the recruitment of professors. Today, we have federally funded research programs which, I quote, expect applicants to clearly demonstrate their strong commitment to EDI in their applications, as well as to integrate EDI in their research practice and design. Now, with respect, the purpose of research design is to enable research to be done. It is not to promote specific ideological objectives. In addition, there are many informal obstacles to the pursuit of excellence in the federal funding system for research. For example, in the humanities and social sciences, where I'm from, it is well known that research proposals which contain buzzwords and a fashionable progressive language have a much better chance of being funded than proposals which are on more traditional subjects and which adopt more traditional approaches. This means that from the beginning of their careers, young scholars are taught that the way to get ahead in academia is to be a conformist, is to chase grant money using buzzwords, regardless of what they actually believe is intellectually valuable and important. Now, I speak, like Dr. Freeman, I speak to this committee as a former recipient of money from SHRC, which enabled me to do my PhD. I'm very grateful to the Canadian taxpayer and to SHRC and to the federal government to enable me to have a career as an academic, which I would not have been able to pursue otherwise. And actually, I'm a strong believer in the value of investing public money into research. However, in these difficult times economically, many Canadians question the value of giving money to academics to study subjects which sometimes may seem irrelevant to their lives and to their personal struggles. The heavy-handed imposition of EDI and other ideological requirements in public research funding undermines public support for this funding and threatens the future of Canadian higher education. And that, I think, is something which needs to be addressed, and urgently so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now proceed to our round of questioning, and we will begin with our first round of 6 minutes with Ms. MP Baldinelli. Please go ahead. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. In fact, Mr. Zhu, it's your second time appearing as a witness on this study topic. You appeared at this committee in the previous Parliament on November 28th, 2024, during a meeting 111, I believe it was. And looking back at that evidence, it was quite clear there were some technical issues that disrupted you from fully participating in that meeting. These issues also disrupted the members from having an opportunity to engage you by asking questions and getting your testimony. We're pleased that you're back here today, and thank you for doing that. During the meeting on November 28th, the chair at the time invited you to submit any further testimony by a brief, and I just want to know if you were able to do so.
I was not able to do so last time, but I will do so after this meeting today.
Thank you so much. And in your opening statement on November 28th, 2024, you said, today, federal research funding is often allocated on the basis of race, sex, ideological conformity, and other criteria that have nothing to do with the pursuit of truth and excellence. So, in your view, what are the risks and danger to Canadian research excellence caused by this DEI approach?
Thank you for this question. Firstly, right, this is not hidden, right? If you go on the website of any of the research councils, there are pages which are dedicated to, their DEI policies. There are, programs which are very specifically tailored to advance certain viewpoints, to advance certain minority groups. And the truth is, look, research is about, I believe, the pursuit of truth and excellence. And if you tell researchers beforehand, well, we may give you money as long as you do research which checks these boxes in EDI, which where you get money if you are of a certain race or whatever. That already, firstly, that shrinks the pool of people who are eligible, right? People who do not fit certain, who don't have these personal characteristics don't get the money. People who want to do certain types of research which are less fashionable, which are less ideologically on board with EDI, don't get the money. So the money goes to a smaller pool of people, and very often this encourages people to lie about actually what they actually want to research, right? So as a researcher, when I do a grant proposal, I have to think, this is what I want to research. What do they want to read in terms of the proposal? So, you are encouraged actually to be actively dishonest. And moreover, as I think Dr. Freeman also pointed out, a lot of the money goes to a number of very ideological researchers. And I'm not saying that they should not get any money. I'm saying that they should not get special treatment.
It's interesting, in effect, people are committing academic dishonesty by having to lie on an application to ensure they can get a program funded on research excellence. And I think there's something wrong with that system when we're creating a system like that. Mr. Freeman, you recently wrote an article that was published in the Hub titled "Canada's Universities Have Lost Their Way. So why do you keep giving them public money with no strings attached?" In the opening paragraph, you observe something is seriously wrong with universities. So what are some of those issues that you have observed and identified that lead you to this claim?
Thanks very much for the question. Yeah, so, for me, as a Jewish faculty member, the kind of response after October 7th, really hit home. How, seeing many faculty kind of celebrating the Hamas massacre, that really hit home for me. And I could talk more about that, and then also the outwelling of support for that side following that. That really hit home. But I think that there's, that's just a symptom of a much, much larger problem. And why don't I talk about kind of the other facets of it? Like, I think that the ideological imbalance, cancel culture that has been documented in various sources. I think these are really deep problems if we want universities to be places that promote truth, promote discourse across diverse viewpoints, and build knowledge that serves Canadians that Canadians can trust.
I think you did mention that. I mean, that notion of the truth. You talked about in your opening comments about activist research, and instead of the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of activism kind of slants the findings of what the research you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's certainly in some disciplines, and for some researchers, it's a continuum. It's very hard to draw a hard line as to what's activist, what's not. But I think if you say believe that the truth is highly subjective, if you believe that what you say contributes to a discourse that contributes to power relations, you might very well want to be selective in the evidence that you use in order to promote one side, perhaps say promote whoever you think happens to be more oppressed. Just a sort of one kind of ideology within the broad spectrum of kind of the academic idea space. So yeah, I think that what I'm calling more broadly activist research is very well ingrained in parts of academia. I'm not saying that
Professor Freeman, if I could, because I've only got about 15 seconds left. A previous witness last week, or just on Monday, appeared, and one of her concerns with regards to the research funding that is being shared is she's saying there's very little monitoring of the monies that go out. And do you agree with that comment?
True, but it's really hard to understand as a researcher, like what's the useful direction that I should go when I write the grant application. If I'm writing a grant application, honestly, it's for research I haven't actually done. And, I might, early in the research, I might learn something and take a bit of a different direction. And so—
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. Maybe you will get an opportunity in the second round. Thank you. And with that, now we will proceed to MP Rana. MP Rana, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the witnesses spending your time with us this Wednesday evening to discuss federal funding criteria and research excellence in Canada. My first question is, Dr. Zhu, to you. You have been vocal about the way academia is driving away potential Nobel Prize winners. However, in Canada, we recently celebrated Dr. Geoffrey Hinton's landmark achievement in winning the Nobel Prize in Physics, which was a strong testament to Canadian excellence and the merits of Canadian funding agencies. In fact, our government is investing $734 million to support Canada's world-leading research infrastructure and institutes and help the next generation of researchers discover new scientific breakthroughs. My question is, could you speak more to why it's important to fund researchers, even if it seems far-fetched and maybe even odd to those outside the research community?
Thank you for your question. I didn't catch the last bit of your question, but I think I got the gist of it. So firstly, look, Canada is a very lucky country in that we have world-leading researchers. No, nobody's disputing that. We frankly punch above our weight. We have lots of talent. And as I said, I'm a supporter of the federal government spending money on research. Not everybody is. I think it's a good thing, broadly speaking. I think we can probably afford it as a country. The truth of the matter is, especially for things like natural sciences, it can be very hard for research councils to identify, what's the promise, right? Because research funding is inherently unpredictable. You give money to people thinking they show promise. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? So it's a hit and miss. And I think the problem with research councils being able to narrow-minded is that they think, this is the next big thing, I'm going to give them lots of money. But sometimes the next big thing is not the next big thing, right? It doesn't work out, or it's actually not the big thing. And that is really, I think, one of the arguments in favor of being more open-minded and more diverse in terms of what we fund, because you never know what's going to be a world-changing project and what's going to be a bust, right? And so, and I think we had there was a case last year, I think, of somebody in the US who won a Nobel Prize in medicine. And for decades, she had no job in academia because everybody said your research doesn't matter, right? And she had no money, she worked on her own until she got the Nobel Prize for helping to develop the COVID vaccine. So that is an example of what happens very often in research, of promising ideas not getting funded because funders, the bureaucrats who do the funding decisions, have tunnel vision, right? They chase the next big thing, but sometimes it doesn't work out.
In an article published by Unheard in 2023, you stated the fact that the acceptance and the rejection of grant decisions are usually made by other researchers in the same field only seems to intensify the sense that the entire system is broken. Could you please expand on this argument?
Sorry, what was the article in question?
It was your article, the fact that the acceptance and the rejection of the grant decisions are usually made by other researchers in the same field.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So this is a tricky question, really, because obviously on the one hand, you think, who is best placed to judge what's good research and what's not? It's people in the same discipline. But the danger is, of course, that people in the same discipline share orthodoxies and are unwilling to, fund research which breaks these orthodoxies. And I think this is especially an issue in Canada because we're not actually a very big country, right? In any given discipline, there might be a few hundred researchers, and the people who are on the grant panels tend to be the same sort of senior people. And if you say, well, I want money to disprove what you built a career on, sometimes that person will say, actually, I don't actually want you to disprove what I built my career on. I want to fund people who actually have the same approach. So again, that's another argument for why we should really be much more open-minded and have a broader basis of funding for research, because senior people especially, sometimes can be very wedded to their legacies in a way which I think is can be counterproductive.
I want to look into your time with the Simon Fraser University. How can we safeguard research funding to remain independent and resilient over the long term, particularly from political influence?
Yeah, that's a super tough question, right? I mean, look, everyone on the adjudication committee is going to bring their own kind of political kind of biases to it. I think that giving a lot of independence to universities and to the adjudication committees is step one. But step two is also just depoliticizing academia. And I think there's no easy way to do that. But this isn't entirely federal jurisdiction, but getting universities to adopt it so that these departments themselves aren't pushing a political agenda, pushing for political diversity in universities, so that at least people have to engage with arguments from all sides. And I think especially, I don't really care about the political orientation of a physicist, but maybe in the interpretive social sciences and humanities, this is a little bit more important. So pushing for political diversity in universities, I think, will help safeguard political independence. But that's very tricky to do. How do you do that without basically discriminating based on political beliefs, which, I'm not super comfortable with? It's a tricky problem. I mean, I'm happy to offer some other ideas and write them up.
Yeah, over the years, what have been changes to you have seen research funding and academic freedom? Any changes you see?
Time is up.
Oh, thank you. No problem.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet-Joncas. You will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I thank the witnesses who are with us for this hour of study. First question for Mr. Kwon Yisu. In your opinion, to what extent do criteria linked to personal criteria influence, how much do they influence academic excellence? I will try to respond in French. I think there is no link to be made between personal characteristics and excellence. Research has nothing to do with personal characteristics such as sex or race. I'm neither a better nor a worse scientist because I'm a heterosexual, a man, or Chinese. Nothing to do with it. It's a discriminatory approach. It's racist, and it leads to absurd results. For example, the University of British Columbia in 2024 announced a research chair on Canada funded by the federal government for to study the concept of the mouth, the buccal matters. And it was looking specifically at people who are racialized or from sexual minorities, gender minorities, etc., in order to even be able to obtain the funding. I think this was absolutely absurd, nothing to do with any sort of scientific criteria, and this has a negative effect on people's confidence in research in Canada. Thank you for your response. A number of witnesses have pointed out that formulas of equity, diversity, and inclusion that people have to answer to have an excessively negative effect on management. What are the effects on scientific research and on a researcher's work of having to answer this sort of EDI questionnaire? The various institutes for research in Canada have carried out studies on this. It can take up to 22 days on and off to really fill in a single such form. This is even before people started asking about very specific levels of agreement to EDI approaches. Now it takes even longer. So people want to carry out research, but they have to fill out these EDI forms. This gets in the way of their carrying out their research. It wastes the taxpayers' money. In the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States recently found that various EDI approaches are unconstitutional. What can we learn from that about research in Canada? Canada and the United States are two different legal regimes, of course. In Canada, according to our Supreme Court, EDI is constitutional. We have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms here in Canada, which states that positive discrimination for equality approaches is legal. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's a good thing to do. I think that many Canadians, in fact, most Canadians, don't want to support a system that allows for money to be distributed on this basis. In the United States, they have questioned affirmative action, and they're not done with it. They're still recruiting talent around the world, though, based on this approach, and I think that in Canada we should weigh how useful it is. Canadians aren't different than other countries and other peoples. We're an open-minded people. We want people to be judged on merit and not based on personal characteristics. Thank you. Still, in EDI policies, is there a tendency to influence researchers and their very ability to explore topics in an independent fashion? Yes, there's a self-censorship that sets in. It depends on the topic. People realize that they have to cover certain issues discreetly and present their research activities in a specific fashion. They have to make sure they don't say anything that's not popular. The other effect of censure is really ongoing among scientists based on their points of view. It should be a free community. I shouldn't have to think if I publish this, my colleagues will have a poor opinion of me because of my personal opinions, et cetera, et cetera. Given the level of international competition for talent, should this issue be something we address in order to make sure we continue to draw foreign talent? In Europe, in the United Kingdom and various areas in Europe, Canada has developed a reputation as an excessively woke country. And this is not something that my colleagues to the right say. A number of people say that they actually don't want to work in Canada because their, access and EDI and so on is just kind of over the top. So there is a negative effect on our talent searches. Scientists want to carry out their own research. They don't want to spend their time conforming to EDI requirements. And the opinion is that if you come to Canada, you'll have to do that.
The first round comes to an end. We will start our second round of 5 minutes with Mr. Ho. Mr. Ho, you can please begin, and you will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions will start with Professor Freeman. So you mentioned a lack of political sort of viewpoint diversity in universities, and I think there was a study shown that 88% of college faculty are left-leaning versus the rest are right-leaning, and there's a clear imbalance there. So I just want to get your perspective on how how that plays out in your world and in your experience as faculty and as your experience as a student, and just understand how the Liberal government has let us get to this stage.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yeah, there's lots of different studies, not as many on Canada, lots on the US, and it does vary based on discipline. So luckily, I'm in economics, and yes, there's maybe a 4-to-1, like liberal to conservative kind of ratio, but lots of people are in the center, kind of center left. And, people are pretty tolerant. I have good relations with in my own department. How does it work at a university? Well, if you have people who are higher, instead of just focusing on the left to right ratio, think about the ratio of people who are on the far left and would self-identify as such relative, and I'm not talking like your liberal voter, like people who are on the far left, the ratio of them to, people who are kind of on the right, center right, whatever. There's far more people on the far left.
What are some examples of that far left activism?
Yeah, so the buzzwords you'd hear, Marxist scholarship, critical race theory. People would use those as examples of kind of leftist, as activist forms of scholarship that tend to be associated with far left politics.
Yeah, wouldn't you agree that the funding that comes from the government or from tax dollars, and you would expect a balanced, apolitical view of things, and it's just not happening at university faculties? Would you agree with that it's just not, there's a total imbalance? And you would think that there should be strings attached to the money too, right?
Yeah, so I don't know about strings attached. Research, it's really hard to predict the results of research in advance. So I don't know so how you want to think about strings attached. That's very tricky. But I would say that, yes, there is a political imbalance in faculty. That's almost beyond dispute. And it's most extreme in disciplines where, that aren't positivist, that are more subject to researcher biases, in interpretive social sciences and humanities.
You mentioned about October 7th and, there's sort of the anti-Semitism that we've seen all across the country, and Jewish faculty and Jewish students have had to experience. Could you tell me a bit about your experience?
Yeah, I wrote a brief for the House Justice Committee. And yeah, seeing people politicizing the university, trying to, pass a motion to, an anti-Israel motion at my union. That was very disheartening. Also seeing the students kind of speaking up for Palestine when, as faculty kind of aligning with them, joining groups like Faculty for Palestine or Students for Justice in Palestine, which, are kind of in bed with kind of Sammy and Hamas, where there's clearly links with that. Faculty from my university were at the UBC, anti-Israel encampment with members from Sammy.
Your voice is now suppressed, and you feel less safe as a result of this, and maybe you can't exercise your full freedom of academic freedom as a result of this.
Look, I've had, as people have tried to politicize the university in various ways to say, push divestment from arms manufacturers, which I definitely oppose, my views have come out. So, you can't find my office location online. I lock my doors, make sure people don't know where I live.
Wow.
it's a new reality. Like Jewish people have gotten used to this kind of thing over the generations, and you know, I just got to get used to it.
Do you agree that the government should do something about this?
Yes.
Wow. What can they do about it, do you think?
You know, I mean, so first, remember that universities are primarily provincial jurisdictions. So, you know, so first, in terms of thinking about the allocation of SHRC funding across disciplines, I think that's number one, since this kind of activism at the university level, it is coming from somewhere. It's coming from these kind of far left activist movements. So number one. Number two, you know, in thinking about what conditions are attached to the indirect costs of the indirect research funding, not, you know, I'm not saying, you know, withdraw people's grants, but there's a big slush fund of money going to universities that they're using to pay administrators and stuff like that. You might consider some policies and making that conditional on some policies.
Federal tax dollars goes into it, so indirectly it is tied to the federal government, and whether it's funding or ultimately trickles down to the faculty, to the administrators, and essentially has created this space that has suppressed voices that are dissenting, even, you know, Jewish voices, but also voices of.
Sorry, Mr. Robo, your time is up. Thank you. Just to remind everybody, the scope is the federal research funding criteria for this study. With that, now we will proceed to MP Jessic. MP Jessic, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I would say that perhaps we could keep some language in this committee, non-partisan and objective and directed to the purpose of this particular study. And with that, I would like to ask both Professor Freeman and Dr. Yi Zhu. First of all, Professor Freeman, I think your experience has been particularly with SRSR. Is that correct? You haven't been involved with NSERC or CAI or the other funding agencies that the federal government has in place? Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and
just SHRC. Yeah.
Yeah, and you, Dr. Yi Zhu? Correct. Okay. Now, we have heard a number of suggestions already in the course of the study that I think might assist both of you in hearing. The concept, perhaps, of blinding the initial proposal, the application made to one of the tri-agencies, in terms of who the professor involved is, the researcher, the number of papers published, any kind of identifying characteristics so that the proposal would be looked at as objectively as possible, the originality of the idea, the research capacity potentially of the team. Have you followed our deliberations in this committee? I'll start with you, Professor Freeman. And does that kind of perhaps merit-based review, strictly looking at the proposal itself, not necessarily the proponents, does that appeal to you?
Yeah, so I tried to follow the committee a bit and I didn't hear that one. So that's new to me. The idea of blinding the author's, the proposer's name, fine. It's probably a good idea. So in terms of blinding the number of papers published, so at least for SHRC, we're looking at both the proposal itself for the challenge criteria, but also for the capability criteria. You're basically scoring their CV. What's their track record in publishing papers? So I don't know how you're supposed to do that unless you want to kind of separate those two parts out, which it might be feasible. It adds a little bit of admin, but it's not a bad idea.
Okay, the stepwise concept has been introduced as well, and thank you for that. Dr. Yi Zhu, have you followed any of our deliberations and heard some of the suggestions that have been made, and do you have any comments?
I'm afraid I didn't follow this committee, but I have heard of this idea. There are two views on this. The first view is we should do this, right? Your name or your identity shouldn't factor in. And the second view is, well, if somebody is successful already, why don't we give them more money because they were successful already? To which the answer is, well, maybe that person is really good at getting grant money, right? Is there a link between getting grant money, for instance, and success. Some people are just really good at doing grants, right? They have a certain magic to it. So I think there is a debate to be had here as to whether this would make a difference. I suspect it really depends on the level of funding, right? Funding for PhD candidates is not the same thing as funding for very senior researchers. I think if you are a Nobel Prize winner, you have a big lab, and you ask for money, I think maybe blinding does actually make sense because you have published 1,000 papers. We know who you are. If you are maybe starting out, maybe that's different. So I'm agnostic, but I think it really depends on the level of funding we're talking about, and perhaps also of the subject field of research.
Another idea that was actually thrown out in the previous parliament to this committee was to have a certain percentage of applications subject to completely random funding. In other words, there would just literally be a lottery for, say, 10% of the applications, because often in science it's completely unexpected what may arise from a particular research. So I just throw that out to you just to see, Professor Freeman, have you heard of such a proposal and what do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're randomizing, it is going to be an inefficient use of public funds. I do think that we can see based on, a proposal and based on what someone's published in the past, I do think we have some sense of merit, at least as defined by the academic discipline. No, I mean, yes, the problem is if an academic discipline is just getting it wrong in deep ways, then there's benefits to just stepping outside that. I mean, an alternative to that, if I could suggest it, might be just having another stream, and Shirka's sort of tried to do this. I think it's with the lower stream of insight grants, but just having another stream that's easier to apply for, but offers relatively low amounts of money for low cost research. At least, and keep in mind, I'm thinking about social science and humanities, where some research is just pretty low cost.
Thank you. And now we will proceed to Mr. Blanchet-Shankar for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vais poursuivre pour Professeur Zhu. Dispose-t-on de preuves solides que les politiques équité, diversité, inclusion améliorent la qualité de la recherche scientifique ou s'agit-il surtout de mesures symboliques?
For interrupting, we'll stop the clock.
Testing.
Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Toujours pour Professeur Zhu. Dispose-t-on de...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Still for Professor Zhu, do we have positive evidence that EDI approaches improve the quality of scientific results, or is it simply a symbolic measure? So, does EDI improve results? Possibly, but I don't have that evidence. If such policies are upheld, what do you think the future of Canadian research looks like? I think it will have negative effects, and we already see negative effects on Canadian research. After these policies have been in place for a decade, a number of people choose other careers rather than going into research because they don't think that they'll be treated fairly because of their personal characteristics. And some have even left research, and some have lost their jobs due to their views of equity, diversion, and inclusion policies. So we're losing people who could carry out good research, but are saying, what am I doing here? When I could get a job in a bank, make more money, or carry out research in another milieu which isn't hostile to my view of EDI. Could you make some recommendations to us? How could we improve the situation to ensure that such things don't happen? David Snow at the University of Guelph, a professor there, wrote a report for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the Laurier Institute. He went through all the web pages of the tri-agencies and took note of every place that EDI had been mentioned. I think that's quite easy, really. You should simply remove all EDI criteria. Take it out of all the approaches and the regulations of the tri-agencies. Because this is nefarious to research, to academic research. So we could get back to a system where applications for funding are judged on a neutral basis without any reference to EDI criteria. I think that would be quite easy to do, and it would be a big progress for research in Canada.
We will now proceed to Mr. Holman for 5 minutes. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also thank you to the witnesses for attending today. I'd like to bring up the summary of evidence provided to the Science and Research Committee by the Library of Parliament, titled The Impact of the Criteria for Awarding Federal Funding on Research Excellence in Canada. One item that stands out is the research provided found that 88% of the university professors surveyed in Canada identified politically as left-leaning, which is very alarming. Also noted with regards to DEI programs, a series of criticisms were made regarding the DEI measures, policies, and programs implemented by universities and granting agencies. First, several witnesses believe the DEI funding criteria were not ideologically neutral. Second, witnesses noted that they believed the risks lead some researchers self-center or include a DEI statement even if they do not endorse it. Third, witnesses suggested that researchers may even use artificial intelligence tools to write DEI statements in their applications. Fourth, several witnesses recommended that such diversity statements be removed from funding applications. Fifth, some testimony suggested that DEI measures are discriminatory. Sixth, some witnesses argued that by focusing on gender and ethnicity, some DEI measures could be discriminatory. 7, the committee was also told that DEI policies are generally unpopular and may trigger negative reactions against the groups they are meant to benefit, as well as undermine the reputation of academia. And 8, other witnesses reported that the DEI criteria complicate the funding application process and place a burden on researchers. As Professor Steve Pinker mentioned on Monday, DEI is a problem. Canada is seriously limiting its potential of being a leader in science and research by prioritizing identity over merit. We should be recruiting our best and brightest to advance progress in these critical fields. Now, my question is to Mr. Freeman. You posted an article in the Hub titled, "Canada's Universities Have Lost Their Way, so why do we keep giving them public money with no string attached?" At the top of the article, you say, quote, "There is ample evidence that higher education in North America and across the West is not adhering to the social contract implied by its public funding." You mentioned one of them as being the excesses of DEI. May you please expand on that?
Yeah, so I mean, since we're talking about funding today, I should mention that, say, in SHRC in particular, when I submitted grants, it didn't have EDI criteria, or when I adjudicated. So in terms of excessive DEI, I've certainly heard examples from people who've submitted grants to CIHR and to NSERC. You know, I mean, I think a mundane example is, you know, currently SHRC does allocate some graduate scholarships by race. So, you know, in terms of, yeah, I mean, EDI, just kind of a mundane example, you know, my own faculty, the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at my university, it lists a bunch of different, has a strategic research plan. Other universities have similar ones. Like one of their, I think, 3 major commitments is to EDI. It seems extreme that that's like one of your 3 major kind of cross-cutting commitments. So, you know, for me to hear people talk about EDIs and, you know, kind of go and, you know, raise the pride flag and have it such an, you know, inclusive environment, and then it's like, oh, well, my next meeting is scheduled on Yom Kippur. Well, it just rings hollow to me. And when people argue for EDI and say, oh, it's because we want to include everyone, we want to have a diversity of viewpoints, and then there's like almost no conservatives in academia, to me, you know, there are potentially good cases for EDI, but if you take them really seriously, EDI has been a failure in practice. You know, and this problem, you know, a lack of conservatives in academia, this has gotten much worse in the EDI era of the last like 10 years or so.
Okay, so my next question is for you, Dr. Zhu, and you mentioned scholars are taught that the way to get ahead is to use buzzwords. What do you think is the impact of this pursuit of trendy topics on research excellence?
Well, I'll take this back. look, there's always going to be trends. We are human beings. Human beings are social animals. We like to do what other people are doing, right? But I think, again, I cannot recommend highly enough the report by Dr. Snow for MLI, where he has a page where he looks through all the abstracts submitted to, I think, SHRC for funding for between, in the last 5 or 10 years, and he looks at a number of words, right, and their incidence, and you can see the, words like, equity or racism just going like this, going up like this, and I think, that really diminishes the sort of, questions we answer, and that, it encourages like group thinking at the expense of intellectual diversity.
We will proceed to MP Noor Mohammed. MP Noor Mohammed, you will have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I just want to maybe start by clarifying some things, because there's some things that were said earlier that I just want to make sure were not, that Professor Freeman are not attributed to you. I mean, you made some comments about protests on campus, and, as somebody who has spoken out on making sure that the Jewish community is able to feel safe and secure in this country as often as I possibly can, including with some fairly obnoxious anti-Semitic protesters on the Hill day before yesterday. I want to make sure what I didn't hear you say is that people who support the Palestinian cause are inextricably linked to terrorist organizations. I want to make sure that's not what you said, because that's what I heard. I just want to make sure that's not what you said.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because these committees end up clip factories. I want to make sure that that's not what you said. Okay.
No, it was a specific subset of some people who are associated with that cause.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So look, I mean, you talked a lot about the importance of diversity of thought, and I agree with you. I think it's really important for. I think my colleague across thinks it's funny that I said that, but as somebody who actually had professors that were conservatives, you might have heard of Robert George, who's a very famous conservative of my professors.
No crosstalk, please, like one person at a time.
So
No
some respect from the colleagues across would be appreciated, but I know that might be hard for them.
Can I stop the clock? Please, no crosstalk. Like the time is for MP Noor Mohammed. He's not addressing you, so please. This is his round of questioning, and he should be allowed to do the round of questioning. No crosstalk. All the questions should be addressed to the chairs, and I really want to have decorum in the meeting. And we are all adults in the room, so we should.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, to Professor Freeman. I just want to make sure that when we talk about the importance of diversity of viewpoints. That we shouldn't be caring about the political proclivities of our physicists or our scientists, of our biologists or our mathematicians, right? We're not saying that should be of concern to us.
That's my take. I mean, it does have some, kind of knock-on effects later in terms of thinking about university governance, which is collegial governance, but that's second order, and that's definitely second order to what the committee's looking at.
Okay, So to be clear, we shouldn't care if 97% of the physicists at SFU happen to vote a particular way.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Okay, and so we shouldn't care whether or not 97% of or 98% or 92% of our mathematicians happen to be liberal or conservative. That should not impact anything, correct?
Pretty fair.
Okay. Yeah. So just to be clear then, some of the culture war language that we're hearing or here should not really be something that we sort of focus on. We should be focusing on the quality of academic rigor, correct?
Yeah, I think we should be focusing primarily on academic rigor, but I do in disciplines where, researcher kind of biases are, do come into play. I think then we don't want to think carefully about representing the diversity of ways of moral reasoning and diversity of political reasoning of Canadians, and it's a tricky problem. So
you've identified that there's potentially a weighting towards one thing. You're not advocating for affirmative action for conservative professors, are you?
I think it's tricky. I think if you're going to do EDI, I think that would be the number one target you'd have for your EDI. Personally, I'd be pretty happy if, we just got rid of EDI and adjudicated things based on merit. But, I think there's a pretty good argument for, especially in some fields where, researcher biases do play a role in what gets produced.
And how would you make sure you're not getting lower quality research in that regard then?
Yeah, I mean, in these in fields where researcher bias can get in, I mean, it's inherently subjective, right? And, as we agreed, we're not talking about physics, mathematics, or whatever, where, research quality is like you're curing cancer. So yeah, I mean, is there a trade-off? I don't know, but the whole evaluation is highly subjective, and the subjective social sciences, and so yeah, I mean, that's a tricky problem.
Have you found that the research quality of your colleagues who come from what I guess has been called diversity-seeking backgrounds to be lower quality than others?
Yeah, so I mean, so my colleagues, let me confine that to economics, since that's where I have the most expertise to do disciplinary evaluation, and I don't think so. Like, I haven't really thought about it actually. Say no, it's we generally hire based on merit.
So if we're hiring based on merit, as you're saying, you're hiring based on merit, and you have not seen a diminishment of quality, you have not seen that the quality of the research has been diminished because a more diverse group of professors or academics have been recruited. How do we handle this and making sure that we continue to have academia that reflects the population, but that doesn't diminish the quality of research? Because you're just saying to me, that it doesn't diminish the quality, has not, in your experience, diminished the quality of the research, but at the same time, we're saying that we need to be do something different.
Yeah, so I mean, keep in mind, economics is very much a positivist discipline. So, we are very much committed to truth, to using data to answer questions. And so, I think there's a lot less room for researcher bias, although, if we had more conservatives, there'd probably be more research on things like productivity, or like, the negative effects of government bureaucracy. So,
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Mr. Noor Mohammed. And with that, our second round of questioning comes to an end, and we will end the panel here. I really want to thank both the witnesses for appearing before the committee today, and we will suspend the meeting for a few minutes to allow the witnesses for the next panel to check in. So thank you once again, and I will suspend the meeting for a few minutes. Order. And I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of our new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. I think we don't have anyone at the Zoom, so a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And with that, I would like to welcome our three witnesses for this panel. We are joined by Dr. Melinda Smith, the Associate Vice President, Research, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion from the University of Calgary. We are also joined by Mr. Martin Norman, President and Chief Executive Officer for Association des Collèges et Universités de la Francophonie Canadienne. And the third witness for today is Ken Doyle, Executive Director representing Tech Access Canada. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for the opening remarks, and we will start with Dr. Smith. You have the floor. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Hello. Honorable Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and contribute to this important deliberation. A recent theme in public and parliamentary debates is that equity, diversity, and inclusion and accessibility in research funding compromises merit and academic freedom. The claim is mistaken and directly contradicted by a substantial body of empirical research. The evidence shows the opposite. EDI and research funding strengthens universities by expanding talent, mitigating biases, dismantling barriers, reducing systemic inequities. These conditions make academic freedom meaningful. Without EDI, freedom and excellence remain privileges for a few. With it, they become the shared guarantee of the many, fueling Canada's research capacity and global competitiveness. On merit, traditional merits, publication, citation counts, institutional prestige, these are important benchmarks. Yet they may disproportionately reward those who already benefit from access to elite institutions, funding, and networks. They may privilege conformity to established norms, incremental work, rather than path-breaking work and reputational advantage over originality. Frameworks such as the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA, call for more holistic understanding of merit, approaches that value interdisciplinarity, collaboration, mentorship, and societal impact. This does not lower standards. It better captures the full spectrum of leadership in research and innovation. Empirical evidence is clear. Diversity strengthens research and innovation at every level, from individual scholar to the research team to the institutional ecosystem. Page and Hound demonstrate mathematically and empirically that diverse groups outperform homogeneous ones, even when the latter consists of highly talented individuals, because they bring distinct heuristics, problem-solving strategies. Across climate modeling, biomedical research, AI, the SDGs, diversity generates insights no single expert or like-minded group could produce. Hofter and colleagues identified the diversity innovation paradox. Women and racialized minorities produce more novel work, yet are systematically under-recognized. Without EDIA measures, our institutions may suppress the very breakthroughs that excellence requires. Rock and Grant show that diverse teams make better decisions by avoiding groupthink. Forbes Insight links diverse leadership to measurable gains in profitability and innovation. In Canada, Momani and Shirk documents a diversity dividend. Institutions drawing on broad talent enjoy better performance, productivity, and adaptability. My recent research identifies an excellence dividend. The inclusion is a precondition for originality, quality, and global impact. By removing barriers and valuing diverse epistemologies and ways of knowing, we strengthen research, capacity, and societal benefit. Governance matters. Governance structures are crucial to sustaining these gains. Universities embedding EDI into recruitment, mentorship, funding, and decision-making safeguard academic freedom. Transparent evaluation criteria and institutional autonomy shield scholars from external interference and internal equities alike. At a time when distorted anti-woke narratives are being imported into Canada, eroding public trust, it is essential for Parliament to recognize that EDIA is not a political trend, but a constitutional, legal, and evidence-based approach on academic freedom. It differs from free speech. Free speech protects civic expression. Academic freedom is a professional right anchored in collective agreements, disciplinary standards, and institutional autonomy. Free speech protects nearly all lawful expression in a democracy, however unfounded or unpopular. Academic freedom, in contrast, safeguards the freedom to teach, research, publish, and participate in public debate without fear of censorship or reprisal. It is structured by disciplinary standards, scholarly expertise, and methodological rigor, and it protects the conditions under which evidence-based inquiry can advance knowledge, especially on controversial issues. Again, academic freedom is not evenly distributed, as we know. Marginalized scholars are more vulnerable, and EDIA helps them to mitigate that. The chilling effect narrows inquiry, research agendas, and silence debate. EDI directly counteracts these pressures, protecting diverse scholars and enhancing the diversity of perspectives, perspectival diversity, and knowledge produced. The policy implications are clear. EDI is not a dilution of standard, it's a strategic imperative. It ensures Canada's knowledge economy draws on the full range of talent, strengthening conditions for rigorous inquiry and positioning Canada as a global leader. It is time when innovation draws on the diversity dividend and the pluralism dividend. Equity fuels freedom, diversity drives merit, inclusion unlocks excellence dividend. EDIA is the framework that makes freedom and excellence real, durable, and widely experienced. Without it, Canada risks leaving talent untapped. With it, Canada can lead globally. Thank you for your attention. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. We will now proceed to Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Merci.
Thank you. French language research is a driving force behind our Association of Canadian French Language Colleges and Universities, with its 22 members located in 8 provinces and 1 territory. Several of our initiatives, including a network for research on French language Canada, a consortium on healthcare training, a consortium on legal training, and recently a consortium on childcare training, play pivotal roles in producing and mobilizing knowledge in French across the country. Federal investments in research have an undeniable impact on priority sectors of Canada's economy and a direct impact on French language minority communities. Many within our network carry out research on subjects of national interest, education, health, justice, from a Francophone perspective. The French language minority science and research ecosystem, however, faces complex challenges: precarious conditions, structural inequalities, and a sharp decline in French language publishing. In the absence of concrete measures to address linguistic and institutional barriers, in particular regarding evaluation processes, the use of linguistic data, and scientific content discoverability, current imbalances will exacerbate persistent inequities and undermine the vitality of Francophone minority communities. This is why we do need to rethink the way we evaluate, support, and invest in French language research in Canada. The federal granting councils must assume their responsibilities by fully implementing their obligations under the Official Languages Act. Numerous studies have highlighted the anglicization of research, the internationalization of research subjects, and the publication of predominantly English language articles in Canada. These trends fuel doubts about the excellence of research in French and contribute to standardizing scientific output rather than encouraging research that meets local needs. The Government of Canada is committed to major national projects and one Canadian economy. It is important that all sections of the population be able to benefit from this. Thus, funding criteria must allow for research excellence in French and for research on Francophone minority communities participating fully in these efforts. The granting councils must actively develop an organizational culture able to recognize and promote excellence in French language knowledge output and mobilization. Bucking trends, they must adopt positive measures to ensure that French language research enhances the vitality of Francophone minority communities. These communities also face emerging challenges. They have growing needs for data, which the French language research community within our association wishes to address. Despite efforts made to the contrary, evaluation of scientific excellence is not immune to linguistic and institutional bias. Our members come from urban, rural, and remote areas and include small, medium, and large institutions. It is essential to raise awareness and provide training regarding unconscious prejudice against research conducted in French and other languages beside English and research in the interests of Francophone communities. Left unchallenged, such prejudice affects criteria and evaluations, hindering the development of French language research across the country. The federal granting councils are obliged to advance the substantive equality of the linguistic communities in their programming. We would also like to echo the testimony provided by Colleges and Institutes Canada. Colleges must be made more broadly eligible for granting council funding. French language colleges across Canada are making bold contributions to building one Canadian economy. Research that they conduct in partnership with local Francophone businesses and organizations contributes to the training of a highly sought-after Francophone and bilingual workforce. Granting councils must capitalize on colleges' novel strengths in cutting-edge fields and recognize the excellence of research that results from their new positioning. 2 recommendations: that the councils adopt a realistic plan for implementing their obligations under the Official Languages Act, which includes implementing positive measures for the recognition of research excellence in French, and 2, that the councils undertake a strategic review of their policies and programs with a view to reducing the linguistic and institutional biases that hinder scientific output in French. Thank you.
Proceed to Mr. Doyle for 5 minutes. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to appear today. And we know Canada has world-class researchers, but we're losing ground when it comes to turning ideas into market impact. And that's where Tech Access Canada comes in. Tech Access Canada is the national network of technology access centres, what some call the best-kept secret in Canadian R&D. The model has been studied by the OECD and is uniquely Canadian. Think of it as a public good, like a lighthouse or a fire department, but for the innovation economy. Our model is simple. We're based at publicly supported Canadian colleges and cégeps. We provide small companies with access to specialized equipment, world-class facilities, and the experts who know how to use them. We help businesses commercialize faster, innovate on the shop floor, and become more productive. Each center focuses on sectors that matter most to their region. 4 things make us distinct, and together they explain why 6,000 companies a year rely on us. 1, dedicated capacity. We employ 2,400 applied R&D specialists, from scientists to technologists to welders, working with $500 million of highly specialized equipment, all housed within 2 million square feet of dedicated applied R&D space at our 70 centers from coast to coast. 2, industry-driven projects. Every project starts with a company's challenge, whether that's refining a prototype, extending food shelf life, or integrating robotics into production. We solve problems in days, weeks, and months, not years. We move at the speed of business. 3, team-based innovation. Each project brings together a multidisciplinary team of R&D experts, as well as college and university students, giving young people the chance to acquire sought-after hands-on innovation skills before they graduate. 4, non-dilutive support. Companies keep the intellectual property. We take no equity stake, no royalties, no strings attached. We give the companies the flexibility to get to market fast without scaring away potential funders. This combination works. Each year, thousands of small and medium-sized Canadian businesses trust us to be their fractional R&D team, accompanying them on their commercialization journey. Now, let me take you back to 1993, when Canada was on top of the sports world. The Toronto Blue Jays were back-to-back World Series champions, and Patrick Waugh and the Montreal Canadiens hoisted the Stanley Cup, defeating Wayne Gretzky. That wake-up call forced teams south of the border to change how they played, using data, analytics, and deep benches of specialized role players, while Canada's been waiting decades for another World Series or Stanley Cup parade. Our research system is in the same position. In the 1990s, Canada invested heavily in research excellence. By the measures of the time, world-class labs, international benchmarking, talent attraction and retention, and peer-reviewed science, we succeeded. But while we took a victory lap, other countries evolved their definition of excellence to include impact, inclusion, and applied outcomes. The game changed, and we're still playing by 1990s rules. The result? Canada is world-class at turning money into research, but still struggles to turn research into money. Put another way, we're excellent at producing research, but we haven't yet cracked the code on consistently translating into market impact, and the data don't lie. Last year, Canadians paid $17 billion to license foreign IP. Yet we only took in $8 billion from licensing Made in Canada IP outside our borders, a $9 billion trade deficit. Over the last decade, that gap has added up to $80 billion. Something has to change. This isn't either or, it's and. And I strongly believe basic and applied research both matter. But, as Einstein once said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll spend its whole life believing it's stupid. By current standards, collaborative applied R&D doesn't always count. Yet, by global standards, it is excellence. And that's exactly why Canada's Technology Access Centres deliver every day, using specialized equipment and smart people to solve a company's innovation challenge, scaling it up to commercialization, and helping Canadian firms win export markets, create good jobs, and grow wealth here at home. But our beautiful model doesn't fit neatly into 1990s-style funding programs. Now, I'm not asking to open up the Granting Council programs to allow colleges to participate or revise the evaluation criteria to benefit colleges and our distinct way of doing things, or even stack review committees with our people. I'm asking for a dedicated program within Industry Canada, outside the Granting Councils, that recognizes applied excellence and adequately supports collaborative industrial R&D at the speed of business. And this doesn't require more bureaucracy, just smarter plumbing, fewer portals, shorter forms, faster decisions, and basic outcome tracking. We have a proven model with Canada's Technology Access Centres. What we need now, in light of our lagging productivity and competitiveness, while our global rivals are moving faster, is the right support and to scale it so Canadian innovators can compete and win. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Now we will proceed to our first round of questioning of 6 minutes each. We will start with MP De Ryder. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for everybody coming today, and thank you for your expertise. I'm from Kitchener. We are home to world-class innovation. Our innovation ecosystem is unmatched. What I see within our ecosystem, though, is some cutting-edge technology, number one, not reaching monetization, and number two, not staying within Canada when they do. To that end, $62 billion of net investment left Canada in the past 5 months. Mr. Doyle, my questions will be to you today. One of your smart centers are located right in my community, so thank you for coming with your expertise today. My first question to you is, how does the current spending support real technology adoption through monetization, which is vital in tech hubs like Kitchener?
Well, thank you very much for the question. The funding's there. It's just demand so far outstrips supply that it's quite frustrating for our centers and the companies they support, but more frustrating for the companies on wait lists. We surveyed the centers recently, and we're looking at 850 companies on the wait list. Average wait is 11 weeks for a spot to open up and then get that support, and 2,800 person days of support identified as being able to service these companies. So the demand is there. Canadian companies want to innovate, but just like a hockey team on the ice, it can't be 6 against 1. They need help. And we are those objective innovation intermediaries that can help them advance their game-changing idea from something scribbled on a napkin to a product hanging in store shelves. It's just the current way of funding things seems skewed a little bit more towards basic and discovery research and not so much towards the later ends of experimental development and commercialization. If you look at the granting councils, I believe their budget's in the neighborhood of $3 billion a year and focused on incredible basic discovery research, like I said. And then you look at a program like National Research Council's Industrial Research Assistance Program, which has industrial research in its name. And I believe it's around $350 million a year. So we've got sort of a 10-to-1 imbalance of inputs going in the basic side and then commercialization coming out the other end.
You mentioned moving towards more commercialization and economic development. In your opinion today, what do you think is the current return on taxpayer investment with our government programs today? Are the taxpayers of Canada and Kitchener getting a positive return for their investment when we come to economic development?
I think it really depends on the criteria you look at. Excellence and what, after the granting councils are great at funding people and projects. But once that check is cut and the project's greenlit, there's very little follow-up and follow-through on the impacts of this. So, as long as students are developing into highly qualified people, and we're publishing and getting citations and patents, that's all well and good. But when you look at that balance of trade and IP deficit that we have, where clearly Canadian companies need to license intellectual property from abroad, and the IP that we're producing doesn't seem to be that attractive to our international friends, perhaps we are creating things that are solving problems that Canadian innovators and companies don't quite have. And if that leads to blaming the receptor capacity on industry for not being able to, adopt and implement these innovations, that's unfortunate. And our global friends have developed models that do look more along the balancing of applied and basic research that maybe we should look a bit closer towards.
Oh, am I on? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. You mentioned bureaucratic process. Right now, what I'm hearing from our community is to receive funding, be a part of funding, it's a very bureaucratic process to get through. Is there a way that you think that we should focus more on, instead of such bureaucratic provisions and things to get through, that we're more industry focused and monetization focused for our tech sectors like Kitchener?
You have the innovators who want to get a bit of help to get that rough prototype refined and ready for scale up to production. But at present, the one program that does support colleges in the applied research domain has a stream just for project supports. The turnaround time from application and decision averages 9 months. For a small Canadian company, they could have been out of business 6 months ago, kind of thing, by the time they get the decision. And there's no guarantee it'll be a yes, because the demand so far outstrips supply. So as a taxpayer, I absolutely want to see the best projects funded. But how the best is determined leaves a bit to be desired, especially with respect to industrial R&D. And then, NRC IRAP does move a lot quicker. They can turn around a similar size decision within 30 days. Our own flagship program at Tech Access Canada, the interactive visits, we're averaging turnarounds in 48 hours and projects from request to completion 51 days. So it is possible. It just requires that will to do so, and maybe avoiding that risk aversion that comes into ensuring that potentially bad things aren't funded. There's got to be a line.
Thank you very much. I agree. I think we need the will to do so. I'm good with my questions today. I'll defer my rest of the time to my colleague, Jag, when he goes.
Okay, so yeah, you just had 10 seconds left, so it's almost done. Yeah. Okay, thank you. We will now proceed to MP McKelvey for 6 minutes. Please go ahead. You have 6 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first set of questions is for Dr. Smith. So I am a former, over here, hello, former researcher. My postdoctoral work was receiving an award for women in science from L'Oreal and UNESCO. And part of it was a requirement, to give back and to support other women and encourage them to enter into the field. So I just want to know, in your opinion, how are women doing in the fields of science, research, and across the different disciplines in the university? And do we still have more work to do?
Thanks for the question. Of course, we have more work to do. I mean, I think since, so that's a great program, L'Oreal, UNESCO. I think the tri-agencies, NSERC with its and CIHR with their inclusion chairs, with their women in science and engineering chairs are doing great. I think SHRC needs similar kinds of chairs. I think in the STEM disciplines, we certainly need more women. As I said in my presentation, or I alluded to, it's not because women aren't doing well in high school or education or getting jobs. I think there are certainly the enabling conditions to allow them to flourish once they're in the academy might not be there. It might be something like family-friendly policies, for example. Even just now, recently, we had maternity leave and parental leave added to postdocs. So it allows the pipeline to flourish. But the other things I can say is when women do get into the academy and into the disciplines, they do flourish. And we see this, and that's evidence-based. So I'm not talking about antidotes or discriminatory practices. It's evidence-based outcomes published in peer-reviewed studies, mass scale, Canada, United States, UK, Europe. And so, but I do think there are some blockages with moving from associate professor to full professor, but that's improving. There are pay gaps. The gender wage gap continues to exist. Women in leadership. Still, the block is 30% at the university president level. Interestingly, though, most of the women who enter leadership are from the STEM disciplines, mostly engineering. And that's, I think, is fascinating. So the gender gap continues, but some progress is being made.
Thank you. Because I do think, there is the adage, if you see her, you can be her. And certainly I know many of the mentorship programs I participated in, that was part of it. And one of the things that I know NSERC has done is allowed for example, extenuating circumstances to be indicated on a proposal, so that you could indicate, for example, that you were on parental leave. Because when you just compare research excellence in terms of metrics straight up, and this is one of my concerns with blinding, if we just look at total numbers, there are extenuating circumstances. Somebody might have been on parental leave, for example, and maybe multiple parental leave. So is it important that we continue to include those sorts of things in applications, even if we proceed with a blinding type approach?
One of the benefits of the Royal Commission on Equality in Employment, Justice Rosalie Silva-Millabella, she pointed out way back in 1984 that we have to look not just at the academy, for example, but at the wider society in terms of these kinds of issues. So yes, we do need to look at extenuating circumstances. We know, for example, that women do more parental care, child care, family care. That care work is uncompensated. But at the same time, then, those who have less of that care work have the ability, obviously, to do, say, more publication. So there's a balancing act that we have to deal with, which has nothing to do with excellence or knowledge or capabilities. It is the circumstances. The second thing I would say about the balancing of a parental leave. Now we have parental leave, so spouses can take leave. I'll give you an example from the COVID survey, COVID-19. When you look at the care work done by women and men, for example, look at the binary, men were publishing more during the COVID pandemic. Women were taking care of children, they were taking care of their parents, they were actually working online, plus doing all these things because kids are not home. And so in a way, how do you deal with the fallout from that? If you take a maternal leave, you also then your salary is frozen. So what EDI policies do is help to mitigate some of these potential unevenness that are not about excellence or your capabilities or what you achieve, but about these other circumstances. And so I think there's some work to do. I think universities and colleges and CJEPs are going a long ways to address these. But I also think the tri-agencies and their funding criteria are doing a lot to balance these things. For the graduate students now, for the postdocs, and certainly for new scholars and as well as senior scholars.
And that work that has been done coming up with those recommendations, has it been grounded in engagement with the scientific community? I know that I once participated in a very large Women in Science Summit that produced recommendations. So has there been engagement from the tri-councils on how they can improve? Like, is that an active conversation?
So I'll just give you 3 examples. One is, that in 2012, when the CERCs were first launched, there were 19 men, no women. And the federal government at the time, conservative, led to a study on what's going on and had 2 presidents, including Indira Samarasekera, who was at University of Alberta. And they found that study led to a number of indicators of what gave rise to the gender gap in research funding. But more recently, the Canadian Council of Academies produced a report on EDI in the post-secondary sector.
I can request you to just quickly wind up. Time is up.
Yeah, okay, so sorry. Yeah. So give another study. So, and Dimensions EDI also did an assessment. So there are a lot of studies which highlight what could be done. And it comes back to the will question.
We will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet-Shankar. Please go ahead. You have 6 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I thank our witnesses for being here. My first question is for Mr. Normand. With Bill C-13, the government now has a legal, not merely moral, requirement to ensure equality between English and French. I remind you, this is the legislation for modernizing the Official Languages Act, but French groups have unequal chances, and we don't really have bilingualism. Basically, peer review is not equal. Do you think that we could correct this to really ensure that Francophone scientists be judged equally with no linguistic biases affecting that judgment? Of course, I think that all agencies, the federal granting councils, should review their policies regarding French submissions. There are a number of studies. We have looked at this. ACFAS has looked at this issue, and several other studies have been carried out. There are linguistic biases and prejudices that are deeply embedded in the process of granting. For example, based on judgments about the subject of the research. Let's say it's research about a Francophone community. We've also been told that French research is less objective because it's a political decision to carry out research in French, so that obviously is a bias. We've heard all sorts of things, you see. But even beyond that, it's been shown that the linguistic ability to speak French of the evaluators, per se, has an effect on how they evaluate the requests. We have seen research to the effect that reviewers stated they could speak French or did understand French, but clearly they couldn't sufficiently, at least, to evaluate the research submitted to them. Researchers get back evaluations with very unusual suggestions in them that really show that their entire research proposal was not understood. So there are a number of issues that must be examined to ensure that French researchers are treated equally to those who submit their requests in English. So in Quebec and across the country in French, researchers often have to go for local funding or provincial funding. And we must recognize that there is excellence outside of the Ottawa network. Do you agree that research should be judged on its merit and not based on where people got their funding in the past? Indeed, that's a good point to make here. A great deal of excellent research is carried out even within our networks that is funded not necessarily by the tri-agencies, notably due to all the linguistic obstacles to getting funding by the tri-agencies and to French granting grants. As I've said, there's a good deal of research on that already. So the context is that our French-speaking scientists look for other sources of funding. I have colleagues who go really across the country who look for their funding in Quebec in order to carry out research outside of Quebec due to the systemic obstacles at the federal level. There's an example. In health, we have specialists who've spent years trying to get funding from the CIHR, but we have a consortium in Quebec that funds research grants to really increase the production of science in French regarding health, because there isn't enough of it. ACFAS, for example, gives out prizes, grants that are very well recognized in the media. A specialist in our network who receives funding regularly from our funding sources has received a prize for excellence in French research. So there are solutions, yet there are so many obstacles that keep these scientists from obtaining federal funding. We know that 80% of federal funding goes to a group of 15 universities. 13 of them are Anglophone and in large urban centers. Meanwhile, small Francophone universities, often out in non-urban regions, have difficulty being recognized. Do you think that specific envelopes should be put aside to guarantee that merit be recognized everywhere and not merely in the large Anglophone cities? That measure that you're suggesting would be a positive measure that might be applied under the Official Languages Act. We're asking for the tri-agency to develop positive measures in response to the needs of French language minority communities and the French language scientific community overall. We must raise awareness among decision makers to the relevance of applying the law appropriately to enhancing the advancement of the status of the Francophone section of the Science Network, and by ensuring that funding is equally shared. Thank you.
Seconds. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We will now start our second round with MP Singh Mahal. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thanks for allowing me time to ask questions, and thank you to all the witnesses that came up today. I would start with Mr. Diol, and in your introduction, you advised the panel that you work with colleges and applied research, and you have a network of 70-plus institutions nationwide. But when it comes to federal funding, you see an imbalance. What the universities receive in research funding and what the colleges and applied research receives in federal funding. So can you elaborate on that? And can you confirm that what are your advices? How can we take care of those in the committee?
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, the college applied research is a relatively new phenomenon. It's based on a very successful model from Quebec that dates back to the 80s, but the rest of Canada really only jumped on board in the early 2000s. So it's understandable that there'd be an imbalance between university and college support. What that looks like at present is last year the federal government funded universities for R&D to the tune of $4.3 billion, and the support for colleges was $135 million. So about 97%, 3%. And there's 100 eligible universities for this support, 120 eligible colleges. So it is imbalanced, and I'm not sure why that is, but that's just what the numbers show.
If you think the federal government allows more funding to these colleges and these applied research centers, how would they be more productive? How would they add to the society? How would they bring more value to that money?
Thank you for the question. I think part of the root cause might be in the fact that, like I said, 20 years ago, government took programs that were designed for universities to enable what they do so well and just, took the word university, got rid of it, and put college in its place. So we've always lived in the granting councils and been seen as a tool of academic R&D. And again, we're huge supporters of advancing knowledge and all that, but that's not what we do. That's not our DNA. So I think the way to, modify the current situation would be, a support program for college R&D in that model that sees us as a tool of industrial R&D, not advancing academic knowledge. And to date, that does not exist and has not existed. Something like that, rather than torture the poor granting councils into trying to conform themselves to accommodate the unique dynamic of college R&D.
Thank you. Can you also shed some light on why is applied research so important and what type of results does it yield compared to other research? And today now is the world of AI, and we have heavily heard about it. So how does these colleges fit into the world of AI, and how do you take it going forward?
That's a great question. AI is a very hot topic. And 3 of our centers specialize in AI. So I mentioned there's 70 centers across the country supporting the sector of importance to their region, and a lot of them support something vertically, like an aerospace technology access center supports the aerospace industry. Some other centers are more of a platform technology, like digital integration systems and sensors, where their expertise is applicable across industry verticals, and AI is one of those. So we're seeing tremendous demand from companies mainly from analog industries, agriculture, forestry, fishing, who would like to apply large language models and artificial intelligence to improve their bottom line, and whether that's increase their revenue or decrease their costs, they're ready, willing, and able to adopt it. They just need somebody to shepherd them through who can be completely objective. And one of the things that we do as part of that public good role is squash technolust, where companies go to a trade show and are seized with something very novel and innovative, and maybe they don't need the Lamborghini solution when something much more modest like a bicycle would work for them and their operating reality. We can tell them what the right fit is for their use case. And AI is one of those things we're seeing tremendous growth in, and we're fortunate to have the capability and capacity to assist with that.
Thank you for the answer. Once again, to sum up, since we are in a funding committee, on a scale of 1 to 10, and if you want to draw a balance with the university funding and college funding, which apply for practical solutions, where do you want to see a balance, number-wise?
That's a great question, and I'm rational, right? And I would never ask for anything that our sector couldn't deliver on. So that imbalance, the $4.3 billion against $135 million, that is what it is. But given our current capability, I think the right number is somewhere around $150 million a year, and maybe grow by 10% a year to meet the demand and really let this model grow. But dumping billions of dollars into it to make it a 50-50 split would be suboptimal for everybody. Sorry.
Thank you. Time is up. And with that, we will proceed to MP Noor Mohammed. MP Noor Mohammed, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. Please start.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, through you to Dr. Smith, it was interesting to me to reflect on the Canada First Research Excellence Fund that was set up by Stephen Harper in 2014, which had tied to it some very interesting criteria, particularly in respect of ensuring that diverse voices and diverse researchers were included. Can you share with us the importance of that type of a fund and why those criteria are actually important in ensuring that we do get the best quality top-flight research in Canada?
And I appreciate also the recognition that these research chairs, CFREFs, CIRCs, Canada First, Canada 150, have been nonpartisan. Every government has wanted to attract to Canada top talent. I mean, go back to your point, universities are rational actors, and we want the best. And I think it's really important to acknowledge we've gotten the best. So let's not be down on ourselves. So the criteria around equity, diversity, and inclusion is quite compatible with excellence. And as I said, it creates the enabling conditions to attract top talent. We also know we have lost some talent because we haven't been able to deal with something as simple as family, for example. You're not going to get people from Oxford and Harvard, as some of the early chairs were trying to do, if you can't recognize that you have two academic families, right? Not just the one you're trying to recruit, but the spouse. So my sense is these chairs and the granting agencies, the TIPs that manage them, have done a superb job. Equity, when we say equity, we're talking about fairness. And the important point to make is that there are always more qualified people for these chairs than that are available. Let there be no doubt, even internal to universities, when we're recruiting externally or internationally, there are more people qualified. So we shouldn't have any illusions about it. Part of what I'm hearing with the institutional diversity argument in Quebec or with the colleges is that we actually don't need to be competing with each other. We need to be talking with differentiated funding to ensure all of our institutions are flourishing. And so CFREF, yes, include EDI, and we've had no problems recruiting top talent.
So for avoidance of doubt, when you are looking at the research chairs, CFRES, others, can you confirm that nobody is choosing people who are less qualified or less capable of good research because of their ethnicity or their diversity criteria?
And why would you do that?
Well, exactly.
Okay, so
I think that's exactly the point.
So there's a couple of things. One of the things that people are referring to is that there are efforts within EDI to say, let's ensure we mitigate biases against Indigenous peoples, women, racialized people. Where did that come from? It came from the Royal Commission on Equality in Employment, headed by Justice Rosalie Silverman-Abella, where she looked at Statistics Canada data, which said that they have the qualifications, but somehow there were barriers and biases that were impeding their access into the labor economy or into the academy. If you remove those barriers and biases, it didn't say you were going to get a research chair or you were going to get into the academy. What it said was you had equitable opportunity. You had access. And so my view is Canada, internationally, is one of the most educated places. It has a lot of top talent. I also think we have a lot of untapped talent, underutilized talent, like engineers or doctors driving taxi cabs, for example.
Right.
So the way to deal with that from an equity standpoint is to deal with credentials and credential recognition.
Absolutely.
So that's why EDI matters. It matters because we are trying to make sure access all of Canada's talent, regardless of identity criteria. There's nobody being hired because of their skin color. There's nobody being hired because of their gender. That is outside the law, for example.
I'm glad you clarified that, because there's been a lot of culture war type of language that's, I think, diminished in people's eyes unfairly the work that is being done by people who do not deserve that type of criticism. With the remaining time that I have left, which I think is like 10 seconds, Mr. Doyle, commercialization of research, I think it's really important. What more can we be doing to ensure that we are commercializing research coming out of our institutes and our universities?
Noor Mohammed. If you don't get any opportunity, you can always send in a written response to the question which has been raised by MP Noor Mohammed. So my job is to keep the clock. We will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet Jonker for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead. You have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Vous me permettrez de...
Thank you, Madam Chair. You will allow me, please, to file a motion regarding the study we're now carrying out, that the committee requests that the 3 granting councils, namely the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, appear before the committee during its study on the impact of the criteria of awarding federal funding on research excellence in Canada to provide testimony on this matter, that the committee allocate 1 hour for their testimony. I'd already discussed this with my colleagues, Madam Chair, and these people have been invited in the past, but unfortunately were unable to come and testify. It seems to me that
I just something with all the committee members, because this is the first time it is happening. So I would just like to have the will of the committee, that how we should be proceeding. So I have seen in the committees that either if a motion is brought in, we stop the clock, and you have the time to, if it is in order, to explain about that. I have seen practices in many committees that if you continue for 2.5 minutes, you lose your time. So how would the members like to proceed in this committee? Like any suggestions or anything? Yes, you want to say something?
Madam Chair, I think that, listen, I don't speak to the motion, which I think is a very important discussion for us to have, but I would submit if someone's going to submit a motion or during the course of their clock, then that should run their clock.
Mr. Baldinelli, you were saying?
Madam Chair, I've been members of previous committees where the time would stop, so I've had that other experience as well, and then my colleague would get his time again following the introduction of the motion. It's a very short motion as well. I think we can speak to it, vote to it, and move back into committee hearing quickly.
Any other? Yes, Mr. Blanchet.
Madame la Présidente, à tout récent.
Madam Chair, with all the respect, I would like you to explain why you interrupted me while I was speaking during my speaking time to put questions to my colleague before I'd finished what I had to say. Why didn't you wait for me to finish what I had to say?
I've been a parliamentarian for 5.5 years, and this is the first time I've lived such a situation, and I must say I find this very confounding, the way you are chairing this committee to interrupt a parliamentarian while they are debating, or rather tabling, a notice of motion and turning to ask other colleagues for their opinions before returning to the parliamentarian whose time it was and before I could continue what I had to say. So would you be kind enough to explain your behavior to me?
Thank you for raising that, and I stopped the clock. So, because it was the first time it was happening in the committee, so I just wanted to get how we should be functioning, and my job is to go by the will of the committee members. So.
Donc, Madame la Présidente, si je comprends.
So, Madam Chair, if I understand you correctly, understand your answer correctly, your stopping the clock gives you the right to interrupt any parliamentarian while they are in the process of tabling a notice of motion?
You read the motion. The motion was completely read by you, and now you were going into explanation. So I just wanted to clarify before you go into explanation, but I did not interrupt you during tabling the motion. You read the complete motion.
Madame la Présidente, je vous invite à revoir.
Madam Chair, I would invite you to reconsider your intervention. You clearly said, I interrupt you to try to explain to colleagues how we shall proceed within this committee to the tabling of notices of motion. I would certainly appreciate, I do appreciate your excusing yourself, and I certainly hope this won't occur again today. I certainly hope that in future we will remain civil and that you shall no longer permit yourself to interrupt parliamentarians, even though you wish to ask for the advice of other colleagues.
You can go ahead, and we can discuss this in the committee business for future purposes, so please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, j'expliquais, comme je le faisais.
Thank you very much. So I was explaining, as I was saying at the outset, that this notice of motion and tabling it is important, given that those who administer the criteria for awarding federal funding on research in Canada are the granting agency. Councils, we've invited them to come and testify. Unfortunately, they did not make that a priority, or they haven't had a chance to, let's say, come in and testify. It seems important to me that these people who work within the ecosystem of scientific research be, of course, held to come and testify before us. Thank you.
So we have a motion, so the floor is open for debate. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. À mon avis, la motion de mon...
Thank you, Madam Chair. To my mind, my colleague's motion is important. If we have potential witnesses, we might use this motion to ensure that they are heard, these people are heard, that their voices are heard. I think this is certainly something we can support. Is this the best way to reach this aim?
With my trying, I have no. I'm just wondering, is that the best way for us to get to the outcome which he wants, which is for these three organizations to show up and present testimony for an hour? So, if we have to do a motion, so be it. But perhaps we might be able to assure that they show up, which I think is what my colleague would like. But no problem with the motion itself. Just curious in terms of how we achieve the goal.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I believe we've also, through the clerk, invited all three as well. We've heard from one has agreed, but I agree. I mean, I would rather have all three, and so that's why the notion of motion, because I don't want just one of the councils appearing and not all three. So from this standpoint, I'm pleased to support my block colleagues' motion. And so that it sends a message to the three agencies that I think it's important that all of them attend the committee, and I'm prepared to vote if my colleagues are as well. We can get this resolved and settled, and we can get back to the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Baldinelli. Just to let everyone know that one of the witnesses is already scheduled for Wednesday, September 24, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And they are appearing in the second panel, 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. So,
And let's see if we can get all three at the same time.
okay, seeing no further debate, we will take the vote on the motion. So I will ask the clerk to please take the motion, take the vote, sorry. Or if everyone is in consensus, we can do it by show of hands. Okay, so the motion is adopted. MP Blanchet-Shankar, you can please go ahead with your round of questioning.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je poursuis mes questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I go to Mr. Normand. Federal funding already funds many research infrastructures, but mostly in Anglophone universities. And Francophone researchers, especially in the regions, don't have equal access. Would you support a program, a model that would ensure equal sharing of research funding? The issue that I see, I mean, basically, yes, I fully agree. The sharing all the resources is the right way to go. Our network is really spread across the entire country, and access to research infrastructure might become more difficult. For example, it's not as though, let's take the University of Alberta, the Saint Jean campus, there's no immediate network around there with research capacities in French that would allow them to fill in for what they need. But if we're going to go down that path, imagine that to ensure equal access, that everyone have access to such infrastructure, perhaps extra funding to allow people to move between provinces to go carry out research in labs in another province that does work in French, let's say, but ensuring that the infrastructure be available in French, equally available in French. If, let's say, there's AI or computer material that's available in French. So, yes, and I certainly think that such efforts to reduce barriers should be effective. Now, it requires transparency to ensure that the feds work on this. Do you think that breaking the data down by language and by province and by project really allows for us to evaluate what the tri-agencies are doing? Yes. In any case, I point us back to the Official Languages Act. The tri-agencies must produce data demonstrating whether or not their programming has a negative effect on the Francophone communities, the French language community. So this will become mandatory under the Act. To conclude, do you have any other suggestions that would bring more equality to the awarding of federal funding, especially given that the only criteria at present is scientific validity and merit? Well, to act on entrenched biases, ensure that these biases have no effect on the choices made of which projects to fund, and thus to work towards more equality in funding.
This come to an end, and I would.
I know, I apologize, but just one quick question. I just wanted to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Noor Mohammed. He had asked Mr. Doyle a question.
Are you trying to ask some question?
Well, not asking a question, but Mr. Noor Mohammed had just asked Mr. Doyle if he could present a brief, I believe, on ways that the government of Canada can best commercialize its research.
No, I'm coming to that. Okay. I will tell. So with that, I really want to thank all the three witnesses for appearing before the committee. So if you were not able to answer any question, you can please submit a written, send a written submission to the clerk of the committee, and that will be circulated to all the members of the committee. And with that, yes, Mr. Singh.
Just to clarify your comment, Madam Chair, only to the question that was not answered, not in otherwise.
Otherwise, also, like if they were not able to answer any question because of the time, they can submit the written submission, or if there is anything else which you were not able to bring to the attention of the committee because of time, you can always submit a written submission, and those will be circulated to the members of the committee and will be considered while drafting the reports. So do I have the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Okay, thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.